The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for spending a bit of your day with us today. We're very excited to have you here. Today's session is all about tackling the challenges of mastering construction in progress, or CIP, especially in industries where it's really important to get it right. Before we jump in, I have just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. My name is Tani, by the way. I'm the product marketing manager here at Sage. We are recording the webinar today, so if you need to step away or you'd like to review or share it later, then we've got you covered there. And also wanted to let everybody know that while you're on mute, it doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you, because we definitely do. So please drop your questions in the Q&A box at any time, and our host today, Angie, will tackle them at the end. And don't worry if you don't get your question answered, we absolutely will follow up with you after. And now, speaking of Angie, I'd like to introduce her. We are so lucky to be joined by her today. She is our senior product manager for Sage Fixed Assets, and she brings such a ton of experience and heart to the space. Today, she's going to be diving in, of course, to how you can streamline CIP tracking. She's got lots of insights and tips, and just listen up closely, because she will not hold back on sharing those out. And again, you can always listen back, so don't worry if you miss something. But hopefully what you'll do is walk away feeling more confident about compliance and capitalization when it comes to CIP. So Angie, welcome this morning, and take it away.
Thank you for that, Tani. Thanks for a beautiful introduction, and good morning and afternoon to everybody joining us today. As Tani had mentioned, we're going to be talking about strategies for accurate tracking compliance within this demo today. And then again, we'll do a short demo into the product. Today's going to be a little different. It's not like our usual webinars where we're just diving into the product, but we're talking about the strategies in more of a conversational tone. And then towards the end, when I go into the software, I'm not just going to do a software demo, but we're going to talk about and show the key points of implementing a system for CIP. So hopefully you can leave today with some ground rules and some action items for yourself on things to consider, so that you can start diving in on these strategies and best practices and put them into real play. Okay, so we'll start off about why CIP really matters. Just so we're clear, CIP is really tracking the projects of fixed assets before they become fixed assets and capitalized assets. So some people get caught up on the word of CIP or the meaning of construction in progress, where it's not just construction projects, right? It could be anything. It could be a construction project of a machinery equipment where it takes 10 to 20 different components that need to come together to be built before we could start production using that machine for production, right? So that, in a sense, is a construction and progress or project, right? So it's not just about building a building or a leasehold improvement or a remodel or anything like that. Large constructions, can it be those? Yes, absolutely. But they can also be smaller things. In the retail world, they can also mean different things for, I think what some retail people and restaurants call bump in the nights, right? It could be anything that needs repaired that goes out across different locations within our facilities, and we want to track all that to make sure that we're tracking, every aspect and facade that moves through our books for payment progress, any kind of a scheduling for disposals on the out when the new one comes in, and so forth. So tracking that can be quite the feat, especially because it doesn't just involve the finance team. It involves facilities, maintenance, tax, the upper C level, FP&A for financial planning and analysis. It involves so many different people that doesn't just live in finance. But most of the time, I find in my 26 years of experience in the field and out of it, is that it lives in spreadsheets most of the time. And I love it when people say, I have these templates, but they're really just, spreadsheets that have rolled over and been evolving since the point of time. And so all of these things matter because it has a real direct impact on financial reporting, its accuracy, how we get our audits, our processes in place. It's critical for compliance purposes and even forecast and budgeting of these projects. Where are these projects at in time and space, right? Are we on time? Are we behind? How and why are we behind or even on time? So it flips back and forth from positive to negative on every project aspect. And it's really important that we understand that and we track it in a good, sufficient way with processes and policies that help us, hold our hands as well. Because why? Because we can avoid, when we start doing this, we can avoid misstatements of not just overcapitalization, but also undercapitalization. More times than not, when I review projects with customers, I find that not only have we sent too many assets over multiple times from a spreadsheet because we just didn't know, but we've also most of the time missed sending those over as well. So we want to make sure we capture all that stuff. So which leads us into common CIP challenges, right? So the first one that we have is incomplete or delayed project closeouts. So if we don't have a system that we can all join in and look and view and contribute to, and pretty much use as a communication device, if you will, then we start seeing all these incomplete and delayed projects. They either don't get closed out properly, on time, or sometimes, unfortunately, not at all. And I've seen that time and time again as well. Also, manually tracking with spreadsheets. I've already mentioned it. This is going to be my soapbox with you for the next 40 minutes, where, tracking with spreadsheets, because it doesn't always fall on finance as a task. It is cross-functional, right? Meaning CIP is a cross-functional effort across multiple departments, multiple people that are part of this project, even the project manager of this project as it moves forward in time. And a lot of times when we have spreadsheets, that's just what they are. They're a spreadsheet. And what can happen in a spreadsheet is a multitude of things, but mostly it's not just a template. So we have different versions of a spreadsheet depending on the project, depending on the person, depending on if it's a project that's lasted 2 to 3 years, right? Maybe that spreadsheet has many faces, many tabs, many people touching it, which just means more opportunity for error, right, and inaccuracy. Other again is the disconnect between finance, facilities, and procurement teams. Again, I can't stress enough that it's a cross-functional effort, CIP, and that it's not just finance. And oftentimes I see where it's laid onto finance, but the communication is still missing, right? The communication between who's out there managing the project, of receiving all of the things that come in, dealing with the architects, the city maybe for permits, dealing with all the different contractors that come in and out, the progress payments, things that get broken and then have to get replaced. I mean, if that communication is not going back and funneling down to finance, how are they supposed to know? But a lot of times the pressure comes down to finance, but yet again, it's very cross-functional. So when we're only using spreadsheets, that becomes quite the problem because it's not really a communication device. When we start automating this system and allowing other people access to come in, to review, to process more reports, maybe to move line items around or transactions around or split these line items up into individual, AKA assets someday, then all of a sudden it becomes a communication tool as well and not just something that's functional with numbers. The risk of misclassification or early depreciation happens a lot in spreadsheets, especially if we don't have communication across multiple departments and people that are part of these projects. What I often see is that everything gets bulked, right? So let's say we are doing a building remodel, right? And we get from the contractor this invoice. Well, I often see where the invoice is one line item with this, $1 million cost, let's say, for keep it simple. And then what happens is that when assets come online, it's not relayed to the finance person or who is ever keeping track of that spreadsheet or the project in an automated system, even sometimes perhaps. And what happens is that those assets get moved over to the subledger and they're misclassified. They're all written down as real property from this building remodel is the description I often see in subledgers with $1 million dollars attached to it. And what happens when it gets moved to the subledger is that it's now on a 39-year schedule, where if we really look down to the details of the underlying pieces of that invoice, then we'll see that sometimes it's flooring, right? It's extra beautiful flooring, not the actual subfloor, but the flooring, which then can actually be moved into its own line item of personal property. And then instead of 39-year schedule, it can actually be written off with some bonus depreciation. So on like a 7-year schedule or a 10 or a 5 or whatever that case is for your particular organization. So these are the things that we're talking about you have a risk of. And when there's not a lot of visibility and strategies behind CIP, this often occurs, probably 9 times out of 10 in my experience. And which just puts us back to the lack of visibility, which really ends up to real-time costs. It really does cost us a lot if we don't have a good grasp of this information and these projects as they move forward. So some best practices that I always talk about, I give lectures on quite a bit, is centralizing this, right? So centralizing this process where we're no longer using multi versions, right, of these fixed asset templates that are spreadsheets. So instead, we're using a dedicated system that allows us, the control over over standardization, over standard reporting, those sort of things that allow us to see high level, mid-level, and into the details, right? The weeds of the product. It's very important that we integrate with an AP or PO to capture that spend, or at least the ability to easily import instead of data entry, copy paste. That doesn't work, especially if you're working with a high volume situation with your projects where you have multiple projects going at once. You have all this information, all these progress payments in and out, lots of vendors. It gets really, really cumbersome. And the more we can automate any piece of that into our daily practice, the better it's going to be for auditing, compliance, accuracy, and just processes in general, workflow, right? Trying to get that workflow automated as much as possible, which gets down to the automation of capitalization rules that meet your thresholds, meaning a threshold. Maybe you don't capitalize anything under $1,000. Larger organizations, I see $5,000, and in the Fortune 50 space, I see $10,000, right? So whatever that threshold is, making sure that those assets, when they come online through the projects, also that workflow also gets automated, and that capitalization is following that rule base of your policy and your process, right? Your standard procedures. It's just to move that forward. So again, automating it just that little step further and further and further as we can, which also gets us to project templates for repeatable builds. So we can analyze the data through standard reporting or customized reporting within our organization. So we're all seeing the same thing. We're all looking at the same information, and we can build our processes and policies around that, okay? So compliance and reporting tips when we're thinking about CIP, again, visibility and accuracy is everything in CIP. Like if once we get our project set up and our data is in there, we have our automation workflows working from AP to PO into our transactions, and we're placing things in service and bringing them online and sending them to the depreciation. At the end of the day, what's really important is the visibility and accuracy in our CIP, right? So ensuring that we have audit trails on all projects, all the adjustments, all the things that get sent, all the things that can come back for debits and credits, all that information. And if spreadsheet doesn't track that history, right? And if it does, it's because it's a manual effort of the user to track that history of different versions of that spreadsheet. So there we go again, more versions, more tabs. Sometimes I see these large, massive spreadsheets, and they take forever to open. And I'm pretty sure some of you on this phone call know exactly what I'm talking about. Right. And so we want to make sure that we're minimizing that effort so that everything, again, is streamlined. Maintaining that proper documentation is really important. And in the Sage CIP, invoice contracts change orders currently cannot be attached here, but they can be attached to the depreciation. But just so you know, it is coming. OK, it's already on the roadmap for us to be able to attach that information to those projects as well. So linking and automating those workflow automations as much as possible for that seamless transition and documentation. When you use a system that is seamlessly integrated, the history shows everywhere where that asset came from, date, time, stamp, who sent it over, those sort of things. And in my auditing time, I'm so glad I'm not there anymore, but when I was, I could also see that everything for fixed assets from start to finish, the entire life cycle, is just a checkbox. But what they're really, really checking on is how much time someone manually checks and moves things, right? How much manual human effort is in this process. And then that's what they dive down into. So again, if we can eliminate that, that manual effort from a person standpoint of doing, then we also eliminate the audit. Okay. I cannot stress this enough because, again, the key point here is visibility and accuracy, right? They're everything in CIP. So we should be running reports regularly for aging, budget versus actual, capitalization status, if we need to move things around. If we're always running reports regularly, which we can't necessarily do in Excel, especially if we don't have integration on, right? If we aren't integrating APPO and having it dump into an automated solution on, whatever that cadence looks like, running the reports, we don't know where we are. And especially if you have a lot of volume happening a lot. I worked at a Fortune 500 as the fixed asset director for many years, and we had so many projects moving at once. When someone said, hey, what is our total spend of this project as of today? Before we went into an automated system that I implemented, nobody could have that answer in any kind of in any kind of a quick time, right? So it took a few weeks to gather that information because there's so many moving parts and different locations and different people, because again, it doesn't just sit in finance. And that was a problem because by the time they put it together, it had already changed, right? Because of the volume and the frequency. So when we use something that's automated, we're able to obtain that information because those workflows are also automated and streamlined. We can answer that question pretty quickly. And then, as we keep moving along, so you don't get behind, and then probably saying, Angie, that's easy for you to say, but we have lots of things to do. And yes, I totally agree. But if you're in an automated system and you're running these reports regularly, you'll be able to see really quickly if your stuff ties when you send it to depreciation for your subledger, right? You'll be able to notice right away. So these are some things that, these are some tips that I prefer to give to everybody, is again, make it a cadence to run these reports quite regularly, probably more so than once a month for sure, just so you're on top of it, especially if you have a lot of volume. Why automate it? Well, if you haven't understood already, again, it handles large volumes of assets and complex project structures. So meaning that it keeps those templates, it keeps the standardization, right? When you automate the APPO imports, it also handles that volume quite largely. In most systems, and as well as the Sage CIP system, you can import that data across all projects at once. So you're not importing one project at a time. You can import across all the projects at once. And if you don't know the line item number in which the asset sits, every project starts with a pending line item, which is 999, which I'll show you soon. And a lot of times, most of the time, just to get the data in, right, especially if you're high volume, just send it over into each project at once into the pending line item, because then it's there and you can start running reports against the pending just to see where everything's at. And then you can take your time as the project moves through its process and timeline. Then you can start moving those pendings into where they need to go. So that's a good way to get in, get out, make sure everything's there, reconciles, at least from that high level. And then you can start getting into the details as you see fit. Again, the integration is really, really nice here. Just zips up the workflow process. The reports, right? When you automate, you get reports. Spreadsheets is not a reporting system. And I've been saying this, I think, for 26 years, right? So once you start doing that, then you get all these different reports and you can get, down to the weeds of this information, high level. You can also get a consolidated report quite quite simply in the Sage CIP system, where you can see all your projects in a point in time. You can just see your active projects. You can weed out those that are not, and you can see where your actual is versus your spend versus your pending, all in one spot. So, that in itself is worth it, because if you're thinking about, I'm using all these spreadsheets, or maybe I am using an automated system and I'm using spreadsheets for whatever reason, when it's all in one place, you're able to run those things pretty quickly. And it just streamlines the capitalization process, right? So there's no double data entry or triple data entry here. And then also the systems, when they're integrated, they track that movement historically in the back end. So you can also see that information, which again is what an auditor is always looking for. And when you do this, right, it also supports the tax piece. It supports the GAAP. And I know that ERPs can do GAAP really easily, but the big, huge key here for the compliance and the full life cycle, and I say this all the time in every seminar I give, every webinar, every talk about fixed assets. I really think my next move is a TED Talk over here, but is really about the tax piece, because tax and CIP and tax compliance are so intertwined, and not just even on the federal tax level, but also on a property tax level. And I hear this a lot from PwC, Deloitte, all the big ones. I talk to them all the time to see, like, has anything changed? Is there anything we need to think about into our product as far as processes? And the biggest thing they always report back, specifically about CIP, is that CIP is such a mess that when they go to do property tax reporting, that 9 times out of 10, they're either including the CIP in the property tax, which you shouldn't be doing, because if it's not placed in service yet, why are you reporting it? Or they've moved it, they haven't moved it from CIP to fixed assets, or the opposite. So it always stems, the problems seem to always stem from CIP. So again, the tax is so important, that's such an important piece here. I really want to hit that home. So before I go into a system demo, I want to talk about how to implement CIP. So regardless, of what you're doing, again, I would love it if you were off a spreadsheet, but even if you're on the call today and you're already using Sage Fixed Assets and you're wanting to know how to improve the implementation process going forward, these are the steps that I've had great success with, either myself as a user or with other customers over the last 20 plus years. So these are my steps. This slideshow will also be provided with the recording, so you'll be able to see these steps and revert back to them as well. So first of all, you have to start with all the key players. So if you're finance and you're like, okay, I want to do this, I either want to improve my process that I currently have in the system, or I want to move to a system from my spreadsheets, what do I start to do? First, again, I'm still hitting home that it is a cross-functional effort, right? So all the key players. Even when I used to sell it, I'd say, oh, this is great, you're in finance, but I think before we even sell you what you need, I'm trying to sell you a solution to your problem, but it's not always your problem either. So we need to reach out to tax, to finance, to facilities, maintenance, FP&A, get them involved. They're a huge player in CIP because they're the ones giving the money, right? So have everyone involved and then see where the pitfalls are and see how you can implement that into your policy, your practice, your workflows, and everything that involves CIP and fixed assets lifecycle. And then when everyone's together, set up a project plan. Don't just go in the system and start playing around. I mean, I'm really notorious at that. My kids give me crap all the time, like, Mom, you never read the directions, or except for IKEA furniture, because otherwise it falls apart. But always put a plan together and read that plan together with everyone who's involved, all those key players, because that'll make the implementation go faster, smoother, with less headache, right? So instead of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, you'll just go 2 steps forward and keep going forward. Create project templates. So I often see that people have reoccurring projects, which gets back to that standardization, right? So a lot of times I'll implement one project and create it as a template for everybody. And what that means is it's pointing the integration to the depreciation system, to the right company, Maybe it's also including all the custom fields, field mapping, maybe some groups that are in there, all that information. And for those that are using the system right now, I'm happy to announce that in the version that's coming up, the next version, I think is 2026.1, you'll be able to copy project information a little more easily. It'll be even more streamlined to allow you to do real true templates. Because then you can take that information and keep reusing it for that standardization. It'll also cut your implementation time in half of a new project, okay? When we do this, we're identifying on our project plan and our templates, we're identifying those fields again and the integration points that we want to use when we send it over to either or both into the asset accounting depreciation system or over into the asset tracking for inventory. And I'll show you where you can turn those fields on as well during this implementation process. Then once we get the shell, right, we get the container, we get the process, we have our project plan, then we start to clean the data that exists outside of the system or in the system. If you're already using CIP and you're wanting to redo things, reset them up, maybe it wasn't implemented to your liking, maybe somebody else did it before you adopted it, see that a lot, especially in accounting. So you want to get the data into, again, Excel. I always say my job is so funny because we always want everyone to get out of Excel just to put your data back into Excel, but then dig out of it again. So it's this reoccurring cycle, I know. But you want to clean it up. You want to reconcile it against your project where you stopped, right? Format it, and then you want to import it, right? So import the project data, reconcile again, because us accountants like to reconcile 5 different ways for everything we do. Totally understand. So once you get the data in, then you'll want to run the reports that are within the system and then reconcile those back to what you started with to make sure nothing got left behind. So no asset gets left behind in any data conversion. That is always the key. Once you do that, then you can start moving line items. Why do I say that? Because again, going back to my recommendations and my tips, that when you import your data, it's good to import them all into the pending line items, because then you can start to say, okay, this goes here, this goes there. Maybe I do need a new line item. Maybe I do need to break out building remodeling as I put my quote fingers in the air, right? And I do need to break those out into line items, and so now I can start creating line items, which are assets or expensed items, to separate those out as well, right? So now I start creating these items, and then I can start moving the transactions out of pending and put them elsewhere. This is also where I can test out transactions. When you get everything in there and then you want to test out bringing transactions in from AP or PO afterwards, my suggestion is to test out one project and one pending line item first to get the feel for it. It's easier to clean up and delete, right? If we do that. So that's always why I suggest, just go baby steps, right? So test out one import of transactions after you get everything done, and then move it to the pending line item in one project, just so you can get the feel for it, start moving it around. If you messed up, you can clean it up real easily and do it again until you get comfortable. And then we go live. Okay, now you're moving forward. You have new projects. You can use the same project template going forward. Everything is connected. You're comfortable using the system. So this is my 9-step process. I wish it was 10 because I'm a numbers girl and I like 1 through 10. But honestly, 1 through 9 is the way to go. Found much success. They keep reusing the same plan over and over, and it works perfectly. Okay. So now I'm going to go into the demo of this. Let's figure out what I'm doing here. So hopefully everyone can see my screen. I see that it's being shown. So this is the new Premier Planning, which is going through a name change of CIP, which makes sense. You'll also see that reflected in the new version that's coming out of 26.1. Here it looks a lot different. If you're a current customer and you're using the older version, haven't upgraded yet, this is what you're missing, because this is beautiful. Well, as soon as we open it up, we see all of our projects here. which is also new, which is pretty fantastic because we can put all of our, this is where we can look at one spot, right, to see all of our consolidated projects in one place. And we can also play with this view, add columns, sort, those sort of things. So then we can also just see this information from top level, and we can also use this as a small consolidated custom report, if you will, and export it back to Excel in a simple format. So this is pretty fantastic, especially if you have, 20, 30 projects going on, and someone, again, as we mentioned earlier, if someone comes to you and says, where are we in spend, this date and time, you can easily obtain that by even going into the system without opening a project and running a report. You can get it really quickly, okay? So I'm gonna go through the steps we just discussed without getting to the weeds of the system. If you want an actual detailed demo of the system itself, reach out to your salesperson, your contact, and they'll schedule a demo with you to go into the detailed weeds of your situation. So I'm just going to do a high level of how to implement this within the new version of the product, okay? So you can go into File, New Project, or New Project here, and it's pretty simple, basic stuff. So we just give it a name. The code is up to you. Again, the system is pretty awesome. It kind of tells you and walks you through the process that you have 25 characters. So you don't have to use all those, obviously. That's just kind of where we stand. 2504. Just going to think of something real creative over here. And then, pretty simple stuff here. And yeah, I'll have it in. I'll just put. Oops. Everybody's watching me, so I'm gonna not type very well. Of course, that's how it works. And if you have multiple databases, obviously you could choose them now. So now I save. Yep, I'm gonna create it. Pretty simple stuff. It automatically takes me into the project. And at this point, this is where I can also decipher which company I want this integration to go to. It recognizes right away here. If it didn't recognize, there is a preferences, which I'll close out and come back in. And this is where I can say, which default path do I want to use? If I'm using an application, I can. If I want this to stand on its own and dump it to Excel, you can do that as well. So it really spent, these are your system preferences, which not a lot of people see until they buy it. But I'm just showing you, this is where you can set it up. It'll recognize. And if not, then, you don't have to do that. So again, I'll go back in by double clicking. It opens my projects, and I can go in and edit my project setup if I want. I can do a project list. I can go in and do line items. So this is what I showed. So this is the 999. This is pending transactions, okay? So this is what I suggest, that once you set it up, you can move everything to pending. So just pointing out that all I have done is created a project first, and you can see that it already puts in a pending line item, okay? So pretty simple stuff. So I can come back here, and I tried to fix the settings on the server, but it worked. So anyway, we're all looking big now. But if I go here, this is where I can say which company I want this to move through. So for my workflow of sending depreciable assets when they're ready to the subledger, this is where I go to do that. At this point, I have different options. You can use these fields. A lot of times I see people use these fields in particular for project owners or subcontractors, where they'll say subcontractor 1, 2, just some ideas to throw out there. This is the financial information. I would include pending transactions when you start this. I think also on our roadmap, we have where it actually defaults to this, not currently, but it will, because again, many times people will put everything in pending. So we want to make sure that it's just one less click for us to do as a user. And the project dashboard, we have nothing right now because we have nothing going on at the moment, right? Makes sense to me, okay? So now I'm going to go back to the project list. And actually, I'm going to now after I do that, I'm going to go to customize, and this is where we're going to go to, put in all the default fields that we want to do, map it to the subledger. These are things too that not a lot of people show, but it's really important because this is how you're going to use the system, right? So the customized fields, we have project contacts, notes that I just described, where we could do subcontractor, just give it a name, right? You can put drop-down lists here if you want. Line items. So line items are basically what the asset will be at the end of the day, or the expense line item. So this and these fields in particular are also the fields that you would send to the depreciation or tracking. So if you have the full suite of the products, as a current user, this tracking field allows you then to map them to the fixed asset tracking software. So you can set this up to move this data anywhere you want, right? Which is pretty fantastic. So if I want to send my planning reference, which gets back to setting up for auditing purposes, the historical purpose of reconciling all the data that goes into our subledger back to the original project, that's what this planning reference refers to. I always like to show this because this is probably by far one of the most important pieces of implementation of the CIP and Sage Fixed Assets is this planning reference. I usually have always sent it to custom field 10, which represents the depreciation piece, because I don't know why, I just always have. I guess it goes back to the 1 through 10 number girl over here. And even when I went to implement the depreciation, even though they didn't have CIP yet, I saw a need there for the future. So I'd say always leave that particular field open. And then sure enough, they'll come back around to implement CIP as a phase 2 process. And they'll have that field available, which is perfect. So that's where I send that information. So this is where you can start setting up different things. This is where you put the integration. I always show this because a lot of people don't know where it's at. And they're like, oh, well, I'm kind of on my own little island over here of using this product. I don't even know where to start. This is where you start. Okay, transactions, quite frankly, I think it's overkill of user fields. I have yet to see anyone utilize all these fields. They usually use about 5 of them and we're good. But you can also change this to GL code, which makes sense to a lot of people too. Reference to a lot of people will change into invoice number. Whatever you want to do is really up to you, right? So it's very user friendly, and that's why I say number 2 is start with a project plan, because as you can tell, there's so many user fields and so much customization that you can do that if you don't come in with a plan, you're going to, again, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So it's good to know this stuff up front too. Right? It's good to know what kind of customization do we have, at what levels, at what screens. I always say and suggest too that in your project plan, your step 2, take screenshots of all this stuff or pull it up, on a projector and let all the key players see all the possibilities within the system of the fields, how we can use them, where they lay on the screens, right? So that you can really put together a plan that really makes sense to your policy, to your process, to everybody. Wouldn't it be nice if we tracked the sales tax? Yeah, use a new user numeric field for that. Someone else wouldn't it be nice if we could track the sales and use tax? That's your state and tax people talking. And yeah, we can do that too, right? So all these different things, and that's, again, I can't stress enough, it's a cross-functional effort across your entire organization. And there's so much flexibility within this product that it really does help to have everyone's input, okay? Otherwise, you could be, running around with your chicken, like a chicken with your head cut off, like, I don't know what to use this for. So, okay. And just because these fields are here doesn't mean you have to use them either. And what do you mean by that? So if I go back to my line items, let me go back to my list view. When I go to add a line item, it has where you have original budget, you don't have to have your line item have its own budget. If at first you just want to put the entire $1 million as an example as your project budget, and then put in your line items and work from there and have the transactions just all move up to that, that is totally fine. I think a lot of people also get stuck in the implementation phase of thinking I have to use every box in here. You do not. If it doesn't make sense for your project, and maybe it makes sense for a different project, but for this project it doesn't, right? It all depends on how you use it. And that's why I really love the CIP system, because it is so flexible and you're really just boxed in by your imagination, right? So think outside the box and think about, maybe this project makes sense to have line item budget detail. Maybe this project doesn't. Maybe I just have a project that is just for repairs, and I just have a project that's called repairs. Or in the restaurant world, example that I used from a client is bumps in the night, and that was their project. If you want it for bumps in the night for 2025, call it that project, and then each line item is that bump in the night that then becomes, you track all the payment of it, and then it becomes the capitalized asset at the end of the day, right? So that's what I'm talking about. You can be very flexible with this product and how it's used. Okay. So once I do the project plan and I create this information, like all the fields in this integration, then I can also create it as as a template. So if I go to utilities, I can say copy project setup. And then I can say, I'm going to take, my implementation project, and I'm going to move it to project 1, and I'm going to copy all the fields, all the field entries, those things, and the view layout, since I got it all standardized the way I like to see it, and all the integration fields that move over to that automated workflow into depreciation and or into tracking. And now I want to keep reusing that. And this is where we can identify that information and send it over from our template into our other destination projects. Okay. Now I will tell you that if you do it to something that exists, you're going to overwrite it. So don't do that. But I'm just saying this for a simple demo implementation process. Okay. And then you can copy. Okay. Then the next step is your own data, right? To clean up your own data. Now, if you're already in the system and you're already using this and you want to redo your implementation of the Sage CIP or planning module, used to be called, then this is where you can export your data, right? So if I'm in this project, maybe I can change this and add all of my fields. This is how I can customize this list and add all of these fields to here, kind of creating a mini report writer, and then export this data into a flat file that's ready to be used. I can do it that way. I can also go to file, utilities, and custom, that's how we do it. And then once we do that and we clean the data up, then we can go to custom import. And this is where we can start doing this import through the import helper. Okay. We can select all the projects. That's why you have to come in with a plan, because if we didn't have a plan and we come in here willy-nilly, then we're like, oh, I could do multiple projects. Well, why am I making it so hard on myself doing one at a time? Well, you don't have to, right? So if we know what our options are going forward and into it, then we'll have a better start, right? And a better streamlined process. And then this implementation doesn't have to take forever. I also get people like, oh my God, but it's so flexible and I have all this data. It's going to take forever to implement. This isn't SAP or Oracle, okay? This is, although very customizable, but if we do it right, if we do it effectively, it'll go pretty quickly, okay? So you'll follow this process, next. It'll go in, it'll do its own validation to check for errors, and it'll dump the data in. Once we dump the data in, then we can start going into pending. We can start adding these adding these line items, those sort of things. We can start moving transactions from pending into and splitting them up and sending them to where they need to go for those line items. And then we just keep moving along. And then if we want to test it out, now that we have this shell in here, then we can just start testing out more transactions and more transactions, okay? And then now we're on our own, right? And then the second step, which we don't have time to get into today, because today was all about strategizing the use of or implementation of. But then the other piece of that puzzle is sending it to the depreciation piece and utilizing the depreciation piece to create these templates that secure the depreciation methods, the lives across all books, so that when we send, right, when we send an asset over to fixed assets, then we can say spending is complete, it's complete today, landscaping for building 2, and then we can start using our asset templates to assign that information. Bad example because I don't have a template for landscape, but I think you get the idea. Okay, and then you can choose the place and service date if you don't want to do it until later, you're just getting prepared. Then this is where you can split it out into different assets or equal or keep it as it is. And then you can create the asset. And then when you send everything over at the end of the month, it'll go with it. Okay, so these are all those assets that are sitting here idle, waiting to be sent to my company and or out to a file. Okay. So that concludes that. I do see a couple questions.
Yeah,
When you
have some questions coming in, Angie.
okay.
The first one that we have is a while back when you mentioned run report regularly. Is that because no matter which date you put it in to run the report for the accumulated appreciation will always reflect the current balance and not the balance of, say, 2 months prior for which you are running this report?
It sounds like a depreciation report for especially accumulated, because CIP we don't have accumulated depreciation in CIP. So CIP is really strictly tracking all the project information that rolls up to that asset once it gets placed in service, then sent to depreciation, and then depreciation runs to obtain that accumulated depreciation. When I was referring to running reports all the time, I was strictly talking about CIP, which is what the webinar is about today.
Gotcha. Thank you, Angie. And then what if you don't have an estimated end date?
That's okay. Just put something out. You can always change it later. You do have to have an end date, as you saw. It was a required field. So you could say it's a year out, 2 years out. You can always change that information, which is beautiful. Again, comes down to that customization, that flexibility of the system. You can always change the date. It's a good question.
Okay. And then our next one is, and this is referring to the spending, when you import a template, does it all go to pending and then you need to manually move them to the correct project, or can the load file template do that?
That's a good question. So when you format your import process, when you import spreadsheet, there'll be a column that says line item. Now, if you know that, if you know your line items, right? So if I go to, sorry, I have to scroll. If I know that HVAC is line item 4, light fixtures 5, 6, so forth and so forth, when I import, I can designate what line item that transaction goes to. You don't have to put it in pending. I only suggest pending at first because it just gets it in there, and then you can start moving and building it, right? You can do either or, so it's up to you, right? You can move them all into pending and then move them to line items, but if you know the line item ID number here to associate those transactions to in the import process, then you can put those there. But that is part of the required fields of import into the system.
Okay, thank you. And then our next question is, do we upload our invoices when the line item is added or when we capitalize the invoice?
That's a good question. So again, comes down to pending transactions, or if you've already created the line item, then you can move it there like I just talked about. But if you haven't created a line item yet and you just want to get that invoice into the project, that's what pending is for.
Perfect, thank you. And then is there a quicker way to import current tracking spreadsheet in without having to manually add projects?
At the moment, out of the system, no. Our pro services team does have a tool that allows you to import both projects and transactions all at the same time. reach out to your account manager and they can get you information on that.
Thank you. And then our next question is, thank you for sharing all those hacks. We have Sage Intacct with the module of fixed assets. The process is different or the same as the one you've shown us? That's a really good question.
That's a great question. I'll address that. They do not really have a CIP module within the system yet that really works like this. So it's very basic, very raw. The depreciation system itself only handles internal books. So it doesn't have all the makers, methods, the bonus depreciation, all that stuff in it. It doesn't have the rules. It is not tax friendly. They may say it's tax, but it's really only declining balance. It's not the actual true makers methods. With that being said, it also doesn't track all of the rules and regulations that come from legislation down to the product of this Sage fixed asset module, which has always been tax-based. That's how it was built 40 years ago with my tax professionals. It is heavy tax. That's why it's one of the leading systems specifically for tax depreciation. And I gave a seminar yesterday about how the importance of keeping everything in one spot for so many reasons. And I think, Tawny, you'll be putting that out there as well for people to access to watch on their own time.
For sure. Absolutely. And in fact, I already have it, so I'll share that YouTube link. And then the other thing to note, if you are using Sage Intacct, that Sage Fixed Assets does actually integrate with the fixed assets module that Sage Intacct has. So if
That's correct.
you need this kind of integration and if you need that more advanced technology, then it's possible.
Correct. And I'll note too that the integration between the two systems is free to those who have both systems, and it's full circle. So it's APPO into the Sage fixed assets, run depreciation, and back to the Intacct GL. It's very seamless.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that is our last question. I hope I didn't miss any. Yep, I know we've run out of time too, so appreciate everybody hanging on and all the participation. That was awesome. Angie, just so well done. Always so much information and knowledge and passion. I love it.
Thank you. And let me just put up the end slide just for resources for anyone who's here. So if you have the number, you can connect through a community hub, consult with expert services, and the learning that's available out there as well.
And there's all kinds of great stuff if you guys aren't aware of it on Sage U, which is our learning services site, Sage University, and there's even free and low cost training. So check it out if you haven't already, or get in contact with us.
And if you have any questions, you can give me an email separately as well. I'd love to hear from you.
Thank you. Thank you again, Angie. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.